So when we talk about technology, how would Prospera lever this type of tax incentives to develop something around crypto? In Bolivia, real prices in shops are displayed in USDT. And I think that this is the most interesting part. Prices are fixed now in USDT. USDT and Binance rocking the world in stablecoins right now. The Brazilian central bank presented demos on how the DREX super app is gonna work. In this week, they presented some demos on how that'll work. Hello everybody, welcome to another Roundup of Frontera podcast where we analyze what's happening in crypto in Latin America. We are producing the best content about crypto in this region. I'm Ab, co-founder and CEO of Bando and Espacio Crypto, and I'm with my good friend Kush, that he is innovating in places to record. He's currently in Panama, in the airport. How's everything, man? I really hope you do not lose your flight.
I hope so too. I'm at the gate waiting. But I do everything for Frontera. This is actually the second podcast I've recorded at an airport. But really happy to be here with you, man. Just got off. I was in Honduras and Roatan for a few days for the Infinita City Crypto Cities event that was going on. Prospera, we're going to get the CEO, Eric, onto our podcast and have him talk a little bit more about the thesis behind Prospera. But they're essentially building a network state and thinking a lot about the future of human coordination and how do we bring prosperity to Latin America through frontier technologies. So, yeah, man, it was a great few days and super happy to be here with you and recording.
Amazing. Yeah, well, thank you for going all the way from Honduras to Panama to recording in the airport. And you that are listening, part of the Frontera community, you need to sign up to the Frontera newsletter. We are definitely producing the best essays about crypto in Latin America, as I've said. We've been producing a couple of banger analyses. The last one is on the local stablecoin thesis. And this week, we are going to talk about Etherfuse recent release. So yeah, you need to subscribe to it. You can go to frontera.beehive.com. We're going to put that in the show notes. And I just want to go through really fast through the analysis that we posted today. I really like this, from bank to blockchain. In Latin America, it's easier to buy a meme coin than to buy a treasury bill. And that's crazy. And basically what Etherfuse is doing, they are addressing this, and we're gonna chat about it in the episode. They just launched a new feature where you can go from Mexican pesos to CETES on-chain, on Solana on Base, and from CETES, that is a treasury bond of Mexico, on Base, on Solana, to your bank account. Like, mint reading functionality is super dope. We've been collaborating with the Etherfuse guys. None of this is paid content, but I think that what they're doing is amazing, and I clearly see them becoming either being acquired or becoming a unicorn, because their product kicks ass.
Dude, and we spoke. Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, we spoke with Dave before, and he's ex-Apple engineer. We've spoken about this as well, right? And I think it's incredibly impressive. I want to know, though, your perspective as a Mexican. Like, do you hold any CETES today? Is having CETES, because you're essentially, to some extent, maybe like the perfect user for them, right? Or one of their sort of user groups. But how do you feel about this?
Well, man, I'm not the perfect user because I only hold crypto. So I'm kind of like crazy in that sense. But CETES in Mexico are a big thing. And buying CETES, it's a super mega crappy experience. You need to go to this app that it's state developed called CETES Directo, and you need to have lockup periods. The user interface is something that a government would create, and basically everybody in Mexico loves CETES. They see them as like a really safe way of saving, and having Dave here, he analyzed like having CETES versus the US dollar. If you hold CETES the last 20 years versus the US dollar, it's better to hold CETES actually in that long period of time. So I see big product market fit. It's really exciting to see what they're building. We did our analysis on the mint reading functionality that they just launched. And also this launch, I think it's really exciting because it's something that they've been working in the backend for a couple of years now. They have regulatory clarity to do this. They are a dope, super dope team. They are kind people. I'm excited to see them succeed with this. And I think that in a couple of maybe months or years, we're going to see the top fintech applications in Mexico implementing some of this. And it's really exciting to see. And man, you were in Honduras in Prospera. Tell us about it. What's the deal with them?
Yeah, so essentially Prospera is creating this, the foundation for what I think is a really exciting movement, which is network states. They leverage this Honduran law that allowed for the creation of special economic zones in the country. And, it's been a really interesting journey that they've had. There's a lot of sort of literature for people to look up on and read as well with regards to Prospera's journey. But I think that creating these special economic zones is super important, right? Especially in Latin America. It's something that I'm incredibly bullish on. I'd love your take on, like, how do you think about network societies and their role in Latin America?
I first love to understand I know what they are, but what's a special economic zone?
Yeah, so a special economic zone essentially provides within a certain jurisdiction a certain set of benefits to the inhabitants of this special economic zone, right? So for example, we could look at sort of the regulatory side of the house where you have perhaps regulation that is more lenient and pro-innovation, taxation might work differently, and these special economic zones oftentimes have different sort of jurisdictional mandates, right? And so maybe it's independent court systems. And the entire thesis, we've seen this happen in Shenzhen, we've seen it happen in Dubai, and other places around the world where essentially, certain zones within a country or perhaps, eventually even outside of a country are able to flourish economically because they have much more free conditions when it comes to the way development, economic prosperity, and innovation is treated and handled. Oftentimes, the interests of slow, bureaucratic, traditional governments may stand at odds with fast-paced innovation and technology. So these special economic zones essentially enable for the development of that technology. Yeah.
And I have a cool story about special economic zones because we address them from the angle of technology, but they don't always exist around technology. The main thing is that they have like special rules that help an industry grow. When I was doing management consulting, I did a I did a project with like a big Mexican company that had operations in Colombia, and they had their offices in a special economic zone because it was a warehouse. And I was in an Uber, like it was like a 1.5 hours drive from the center of Bogota to this place. And in the middle of the cab ride, 45 minutes in, the guy that I was with, he told me, dude, do you have your passport? And I was like, no, why would I bring it today? We needed to enter into the special economic zone. And I was like, what? And fortunately, I always travel with like a photocopy of my passport, and I was able to get in. But that's when I understood special economic zones. They are treated differently. Even you need your passport to get in. I don't know if in all of them, but in this specific one. And when you think about why did they do that in Colombia, was because they could import goods and pay taxes when the goods left the special economic zone, not when they landed in Colombia. So they could have warehouses storing specific items for long times and just dispatch them and save a lot of money on taxes, on capital costs, on operational costs because of that. So when we talk about technology, how would Prospera lever this type of tax incentives to develop something around crypto?
Yeah, so Prospera is interesting in that it is very focused on a few different verticals, but biotech is, I think, really where they're really excited. And they essentially say, how can we accelerate the exploration of these frontier treatments when it comes to longevity, gene replacement, gene editing, etc., which perhaps in more regulated markets you can't necessarily do, even though perhaps science might indicate that actually it's not that unsafe in order to do
and trials,
that.
right? How do you say that?
Yeah,
like
trials,
clinical trials.
Exactly. So clinical trials, so you can actually take these drugs to market faster. With crypto specifically, for example, you can in Prospera, property rights are tokenized in 3 dimensions. So you can tokenize air rights, for example, right? They were one of the first jurisdictions around the world. Like you can pay your taxes in Bitcoin, Solana, Ethereum, USDC, for example. So it's quite fascinating to see this little experiment going on. And again, this is placed in a country like Honduras that is, one of Latin America's least developed economies as well, right? So there's some very interesting dynamics here. I think it's a really important experiment to have essentially in the world. So but yeah, man, it's been good. Currently Infinita, that sits within Prospera, is running a hackathon right now. There's $20,000 in prizes, and the thesis is how do we explore and accelerate network society specifically and build the infrastructure for that, right? So the hackathon ends in 9 days. We're supporting a lot with the advancement of this hackathon too, which is really fun. So can't complain. Always beautiful to be in Roatan, and always really fun to be supporting these different communities that are exploring what the frontier of human coordination looks like.
Yeah. It's exciting. I think it's one of these verticals in technology and crypto that it'll take a little bit of time to materialize, but it's really exciting to analyze and see. So let's dive into the docket. Our first analysis and the first news is I'd love to analyze what happened with this tweet of Paolo Adroino, that he's the CEO of Tether. And he posted, in Bolivia, real prices in shops are displayed in USDT. A quietly revolutionary shift. Digital dollars are powering daily life, commerce, and economic stability. And basically, it's a photo of a supermarket with Oreo minis that cost $22. Dude, really expensive.
First of all, that is expensive. Yeah.
I mean, I love Oreos, but I don't love $22 Oreos. Super expensive. And also there's a couple of glasses, $107. Some Milka cookies, also $10. These are more affordable. And I think that this is the most interesting part. It's in the duty free, it's like a comunicado, they posted this, that it says, prices are fixed now in USDT. Our products are now valued in USDT, a stable cryptocurrency, which value it's communicated every day by the Bolivian central bank based on the quotations on the prices in Binance. So USDT and Binance rocking the world in stablecoins right now.
Yeah, so what's interesting is they're pulling prices both from Binance and the central bank, right? Because those in theory should be different prices. So I'm wondering how they sort of choose to allocate. There was remember that...
I think that the way that I read this is that the price is reported by the central bank based on the prices of Binance, because it says informado diariamente por el Banco Central basado en la cotización de Binance.
So so they're basically saying based on the price of Binance, the Central Bank of Bolivia is setting these rates. That's interesting. What this says to me is that if what I'm reading is true, which I didn't even believe, right? That seemed like kind of a crazy thought, is that the Central Bank of Bolivia is saying the price of dollars to Bolivianos, if I'm not mistaken, is what Binance, like peer-to-peer markets, say, right?
Dude, that's absolutely crazy. I don't know. Yeah, that's super crazy because the central bank is fixing the price of the USD based on Binance, based on liquidity, based on real demand and supply. I would love to understand what's happening deeper in Bolivia. I think that we should invite Nico Gallardo to explain us. I think that he's one of the best builders. Well, actually, the only Bolivian builder I know. So,
actually, Bolivia weirdly has been seeing a big resurgence in crypto builders. I think it's specifically because of, this sort of law that went into place, and Bolivia lives under sort of a weird governance model where, it's like, is this fully a democracy, right? So, but yeah, I think Nico's a great builder. He was actually when I had the Odisea podcast, the first builder I interviewed. So would love to bring Nico back.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the news. In some parts of Bolivia, starting in a duty-free, they're fixating prices in USDT, not in their local currency. And also, like the second derivative of this is that's so dangerous, I think. I mean, what happens if everything gets fixated in USDT? Basically, it's a dollarized economy now.
This is what we were talking about earlier, right? Is like, why would anything other than US dollar denominated stablecoins actually make it in the long run? And it's sort of like
Yeah.
the bear case for local stablecoins potentially, right? I think Bolivia is a very particular case because of the high inflation. But it's still like interesting to see the things being quoted in USDT versus any other asset.
Dude, and it's really interesting to see that Bolivia went from banning stablecoins, or well, crypto in general, to being. This is the first time that I see price referenced in USDT outside of Venezuela and Argentina. So that's happening slowly. Um, that's why we are in this run of analyzing a lot of local stablecoin issuers and builders, because these people are developing really interesting products. Like I just recorded, you couldn't be there because you were flying, but I just recorded with Will, co-CEO and co-founder of Minteo, that they are deploying the Colombian peso stablecoin, and it's a super fascinating product, and we'll post that episode shortly. The next news. This is an interesting series of events that unfolded in Brazil. So the Brazilian Central Bank presented demos on how the DREX super app is gonna work. So DREX is the central bank digital currency project, and the Central Bank of Brazil has been working on that for a long time. And in this week, they presented some demos on how that'll work, and it's really interesting to see because they obviously first integrated mobile native, and it's another validation of the super app thesis on how these types of apps will work, and how most of them will run on crypto rails, not because it's cool or decentralization is a good thing, but because it's a lot more efficient to run this type of wallets on a blockchain that on centralized infrastructure. So what are your takes here?
Well, have we spoken before about kind of the big gap I feel that exists in the market with regards to local stablecoins and integration into sort of super apps potentially, right? And I mean, DREX specifically being this like big Brazilian CBDC, probably the most advanced CBDC project in Latin America. In fact, I would even say probably it is the most advanced CBDC project in Latin America. The government basically wanting to own that entire relationship with users, I think is incredible. It's very forward thinking, right? Like in other countries around Latin America, you can't even quote,
Yeah.
outside of the local currency. And so for the government to say, hey, look, we want to build this financial super app like a Revolut, for example, I think is really interesting, right?
I'd love to see how they deploy this, because I'm never bullish when government tries to build technology. That hasn't worked ever. Not even in railways. When in the history of railways, when you analyze like state-owned railway company versus privately owned, private always develops better or performs better. So let's see how this unfolds. And just two final couple of news that I wanna analyze with you, man. The first one is that Donald Trump is suggesting a 3.5% tax on sending money outside of the US. And do you know who's gonna impact that? Basically, all of Latin America doing remittances. So this got us thinking in Frontera, Joker, our researcher, what will happen with stablecoins? Will they be taxed the same way? Because if they're not taxed, they're basically incentivizing users or people and businesses to transact on stablecoins.
Yeah, I mean, 3.5% is not nothing, right? And so I think that we've talked a lot in previous episodes around how like mass deportations might affect remittance flows. But
Yeah.
I forget who was I speaking with, that they said what essentially has happened is there's actually been a massive spike in volume, essentially. Counterintuitively, right? What happened is as soon as Trump came into office, stablecoin remittance or generally remittance flows and by proxy stablecoin remittance flows just spiked massively. That was interesting. And so I wonder if we'll just see this massive spike and maybe just like a slow lull happen. But these things are generally fairly intuitive. So in theory, if there's a 3.5% tax, let's see to some extent like some decrease, but people still need to send money, right? It's not like people aren't going to be sending money. These people oftentimes live on very precarious. It's not that you choose to migrate because you have all of the comforts of the
Yeah.
world and sending money back home is a commodity or a luxury, but rather it's a necessity. And so
Yeah.
I think that I don't see this massively impacting. I mean, I'm sure there will be some impact, but I don't. I think it's somewhat negligible.
Yeah, and I think that it'll also influence a lot of international payments because, for example, if you are a company, let's say a company that sells headphones, and you consolidate your business in the United States, and afterwards you need to like redirect payments, you're not gonna pay that. You're not gonna be incentivized to do that anymore because of this tax. So basically, you'll need like a parallel financial system based on the dollar to avoid that tax. And that parallel financial system is definitely run by stablecoins. And maybe our friends at Kappa or different of these companies at Rio and Koiwe and all of them that are trying to do this type of things, they will follow like a greenfield there because there's going to be a massive opportunity to address this market if this tax happens. Dude, and finally, you know that we are collaborating a lot with Bitso. We're working with them on their stablecoin conference. And now it's an MXMB hackathon, building the future of payments. It's going to happen from June 17 to July 14, 14 open for anyone in the world. It's a 4-week hackathon. People can implement Juno's technology and basically the bits of stablecoin. The first price is
Actually,
$3,500.
it's more than that. It's $7,500, and that's just
The
the
first
Arbitrum
price?
prizes. Yeah, if you
Oh
scroll
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. So the first prize $7,000. The second prize $5,000. The third prize $3,000, and the fourth prize is $1,000 in bits of business credits. That's a funny price, and also there are some prices around if you build on Arbitrum. So exciting to see that. Two things. The first one is exciting to see a hackathon around local stablecoins, and then that it's open globally. Why? Because you don't need to be Mexican to build this. Dave from Etherfuse and AJ, the co-founders, are American, and they've built really cool products around Etherfuse. So this is a global hackathon.
Yeah, and what's cool is that, and this is a trend we've been noticing with Bitso. Like one, launching a stablecoin, really exciting. We're gonna have Ben from the Bitso team come and talk to us about this. But two, the fact that they're running a hackathon, right? Is not many centralized exchanges are actively running hackathons, trying to attract builders, collaborating with foundations like Arbitrum and so forth, right? So,
Yeah.
I think this is great. I mean, what would you like to see built at this hackathon?
I think that there are a couple of opportunities around treasury management. That's a big one, like a simplified and like a bank account, a digital bank account that converges USD and USD and MXN for businesses, where they don't see that they are interacting with crypto in the front end. That's an exciting one. I know that there's also a big opportunity in payroll, so a way of automating payments through stablecoins and smart contracts. That'll be exciting. Do you have any ideas?
I think I mean, I'm always thinking like kind of with that B2B hat on, right? So when you send money from, I mean, give me an insight, right? If you want to send money to like from one bank account to the next in Mexico, what's that processing time look like usually?
Could you say that again?
Yeah, so if you want to send money, a ver, te pregunto now. Yeah, so for example, one thing that I've been thinking about, how long does it, if you want to send money from one bank account to another in Mexico, how long, that's fairly instant, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, 2 seconds maybe.
Yeah, so like intercompany payments don't really make sense. One thing that I'd love to see is potentially something to do with FX markets. I think that could be really fascinating, right? And an area that I think will just continue to kind of get a lot of energy. We've talked about how competitive that market is, but thinking more about like the infrastructure that might enable like much more efficient FX markets, for example. And that's because oftentimes with a lot of these stablecoin, local stablecoin plays, FX risk is massive, right? So is there a way for you to like leverage MXNB to be able to hedge like your risk
Yeah.
to potentially, right? And so like some DeFi native FX markets might be really interesting because when you go to Aave, you can't supply an MXNB, you can't borrow an MXNB either, right? So, what are these like very native, but there's so much money that flows through these local economies, right? And so
Yeah.
that I think could be really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely see that. Well, dude, let's finish this episode
I hope I
short
don't miss
and
my flight.
sweet.
Exactly.
Yeah. Please go on board your flight. Remember to subscribe to the Fronteras newsletter. Also, you can follow me at Abraham CR. Follow Kush at 0x Kush. Next week, you're going to be in Argentina. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be traveling around abroad, the Latin American continent. And dude, thank you for everything. See you next week.
Let's go. See you. Ciao.
Bye.